My name is Emma. I'm 32 years old. Have you ever loved someone with all your heart, only to hear them look you in the eyes and say, "I don't love you anymore"? That's exactly what happened to me. 7 years into our marriage, my husband told me he was leaving, but he wasn't leaving alone. He was leaving for another woman. At the time, I thought, that was the worst day of my life. I was wrong, because 3 years later, at exactly 11:30 on a rainy Thursday night, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, my ex-husband was standing there. His clothes were soaked, his hands were shaking, his eyes were full of tears, and I had no idea. He was about to tell me something that would change my life all over again. I met Daniel during my sophomore year of college. He wasn't rich, he didn't drive a fancy car, he didn't come from a wealthy family, but he had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world. We spent 4 years building our relationship, then we got married. Those first few years, honestly, they were beautiful. We rented a tiny apartment, our furniture came from thrift stores, we cooked dinner together almost every night. On weekends, we watched old movies wrapped in the same blanket. We didn't have much money, but we had each other, and I truly believed that was enough. If someone had told me back then that one day my husband would walk away without looking back, I would have laughed, because I trusted him completely. Looking back now, I realize something. People rarely change overnight. Sometimes, they change so slowly. You don't notice until they're already gone. It started with little things. Daniel began coming home later than usual. He said work had become stressful. I believed him. Then he started taking phone calls outside. Whenever I walked into the room, he'd quickly lock his screen. When I asked if everything was okay, he smiled and said, "You're overthinking it, Emma. Nothing's wrong." So I convinced myself, maybe I really was overthinking. Maybe marriage just goes through difficult seasons. I wanted to believe him, because trusting him was easier than imagining the truth. One evening, as he walked past me after work, I noticed a perfume I'd never smelled before. It wasn't mine. It was soft, expensive, and completely unfamiliar. I didn't say anything. Instead, I started paying attention. A few days later, I logged into our joint bank account to pay the bills. That's when I saw them. Charges I couldn't explain. Upscale restaurants, luxury hotels, an expensive jewelry store. I stared at the screen, trying to remember when we'd gone to those places. Then it hit me. We hadn't. My hands began to shake. 100 excuses raced through my mind. Maybe it was for work. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe. But deep down, I already knew. Something was terribly wrong. I wanted answers. I wanted someone to tell me I was imagining things, but I had no idea the truth waiting for me would be far more painful than anything I could have imagined. The next morning, I told myself I wasn't going to accuse Daniel of anything. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed to know whether my marriage was falling apart, or whether my fear was simply getting the best of me. So I acted like nothing had happened. I smiled. I made breakfast. I kissed him goodbye before work, and I watched him drive away, wondering if I even knew the man I'd married anymore. That evening, he came home carrying flowers. For a second, I felt guilty for doubting him. Maybe I really had overreacted. Maybe everything was fine. He hugged me, told me he loved me, and we had dinner together like any normal couple, but something felt off. His smile looked practiced, his words sounded rehearsed, his eyes never stayed on mine for more than a few seconds. That night, after he fell asleep, his phone buzzed. Just once. I wasn't the kind of wife who checked her husband's phone. I never had. But something inside me, something I couldn't explain, told me to look. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The screen lit up. A message appeared. "I miss you already." No name, just a heart. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at those 4 words over and over again. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Then another message appeared. When are you telling her? My heart stopped. I slowly looked over at Daniel. He was sleeping peacefully beside me, as if nothing had happened, as if our entire life wasn't collapsing around us. I quietly put the phone back, walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and broke down. I covered my mouth with both hands, trying not to make a sound. I didn't want him to hear me crying, because somehow I still wasn't ready for him to know that I knew. The next few days were torture. Every smile felt fake. Every hug felt like a lie. Every "I love you" felt heavier than the last. Then, everything became crystal clear. On Friday afternoon, I left work early because I wasn't feeling well. I thought Daniel would still be at the office. He wasn't. His car wasn't there. I called him. No answer. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was my friend Sarah. Her voice was shaking. "Emma, I think you need to come downtown." I asked her why. She hesitated, then quietly gave me the name of a restaurant. When I arrived, I saw them. Daniel, sitting across from a woman I'd never seen before. They weren't talking. They were holding hands, smiling, laughing, like two people planning a future together. I stood there, frozen. I don't know how long I watched them, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes. Time didn't seem real anymore. Finally, Daniel looked up. Our eyes met. The smile disappeared from his face. For a second, nobody moved. Then I walked toward their table. The woman slowly let go of his hand. Daniel stood up. "Emma." "It isn't—" I raised my hand. "Please, don't." The restaurant had gone completely silent. People were staring. I looked at him, then at her, and quietly asked, "How long?" He looked down at the floor. 8 months. 8 months. Almost an entire year. While I had been trying to save our marriage, he had already started another life. I nodded slowly. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a drink. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because when your heart shatters completely, sometimes you're too broken to cry. I took off my wedding ring, placed it gently on the table, looked him in the eyes one last time, and said, "I hope she was worth losing your family." Then I turned around and walked away. I never looked back, but I had no idea that the hardest part of my story hadn't even begun. I wish I could tell you that walking away from that restaurant made me feel strong. It didn't. The moment I got into my car, I completely fell apart. I gripped the steering wheel and cried harder than I ever had in my entire life. 7 years, 7 birthdays, 7 anniversaries, thousands of memories, gone in a single afternoon. When I finally got home, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Daniel wasn't there. For the first time in years, I was completely alone. His jacket was still hanging by the front door. His coffee mug was still in the kitchen sink. His running shoes were beside the couch. Everything looked normal, except my marriage was over. That night, he came home just after midnight. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he sat across from me. "I'm sorry." Those were the first words out of his mouth. I stared at him. Sorry for what? For hurting you. For lying. For everything. I wanted to ask him why. Instead, I asked something much simpler. "When did you stop loving me?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he whispered, "I don't know. I think it just happened." Those words hurt even more than the affair. Love doesn't just disappear overnight. It disappears after hundreds of choices, hundreds of lies, hundreds of moments where someone chooses another person instead of you. I looked at him calmly. "So, what happens now?" He took a deep breath. "I want a divorce." There it was, the sentence I had been dreading, not because I didn't expect it, but because hearing it out loud made everything real. I nodded. "If that's what you want, I won't stop you." For the first time that night, he looked surprised. "You're not going to fight for us?" I smiled sadly. "I've been fighting for us alone for almost a year." I'm just tired." A week later, Daniel moved out. The divorce papers were signed quietly. No courtroom arguments, no dramatic fights, just 2 signatures, ending 7 years together. Friends kept telling me, "You'll find someone better." But I wasn't thinking about another relationship. I was trying to remember who I was before Daniel. For months, I couldn't even recognize myself. Simple things became difficult: getting out of bed, cooking dinner, answering phone calls. Some mornings, I'd wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. Then reality would hit me all over again. One afternoon, I found a small box in the back of my closet. Inside were old photographs from college. There was one picture of me, standing on a stage after winning a business competition. I looked so confident, so fearless. I smiled without forcing it. I barely recognized that girl. Then I realized something. I had spent years trying to become the perfect wife, that I had forgotten how to be Emma. That day, I made myself another promise. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life waiting for an apology that might never come. I joined a leadership program at work, started exercising again, took weekend photography classes, traveled alone for the first time. Little by little, the woman I thought I'd lost started coming back. About a year later, I received the biggest promotion of my career. My salary nearly doubled. I moved into a beautiful new home, not because I wanted to prove anything to Daniel, but because I had finally proven something to myself. I was stronger than the life that had tried to break me. I honestly believed that chapter of my life was finally over. Then, exactly 3 years after our divorce, on a cold, rainy Thursday night, someone knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the window, and my heart nearly stopped. Standing on my porch was Daniel. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. His expensive suits were gone. His confident smile had disappeared. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were red from crying. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me and whispered, "Emma, I have nowhere else to go." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of a truth neither of us was ready to face. For a few seconds, I just stood there. My hand was still on the doorknob. The rain poured behind him. Water dripped from his jacket onto my porch. 3 years ago, I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. Sometimes I imagined slamming the door in his face. Sometimes I imagined screaming. Sometimes I imagined asking him why. But standing there, looking at the broken man in front of me, none of those things felt right. I took one step back. "You can come in." He hesitated. "I don't deserve your kindness." "No," I replied quietly. "You don't." "But it's freezing outside." He walked in slowly. As soon as he entered, his eyes wandered around my house. The warm lights, the family photos on the wall, the bookshelf, the piano near the window. Everything looked peaceful. "It suits you," he whispered. "You always wanted a home like this." I didn't answer. I simply handed him a towel. Then I placed a cup of hot coffee on the table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me. "I owe you the truth." I crossed my arms. "I'm listening." He stared into his coffee. "The woman I left you for. Her name was Olivia. We moved in together a few weeks after the divorce. At first, everything felt exciting. No responsibilities, no arguments, no history. I thought I'd found happiness." He laughed bitterly. I was an idiot. I remained silent. He continued. "About 6 months later, she convinced me to invest almost everything I had into a business she wanted to start. I trusted her, just like you trusted me." My expression didn't change. He lowered his head. "The business never existed. She took the money and disappeared." I slowly asked, "How much?" He swallowed hard. "Everything. My savings, my retirement account, my truck, even the money I'd borrowed from the bank." Silence filled the room. I tried calling her. I hired a lawyer. I even hired a private investigator. She vanished. No one could find her. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. I deserved it. I know I did. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. But that's not why I'm here. I frowned. Then why are you here? He reached into his coat pocket. His hands were trembling. He pulled out a folded envelope. I went to see my mom last week. She has advanced cancer. The doctors don't know how much time she has left. My heart sank. His mother, Linda, had always treated me like her own daughter. Even after the divorce, I often wondered how she was doing. Daniel looked away. She refuses treatment, I whispered. Why? Because she thinks I destroyed every good thing in my life. And she blames herself for raising me that way. Tears rolled down his face. The last thing she told me was, the only person who ever truly loved you was Emma. I didn't believe her back then. But I do now. He looked directly at me. I've spent 3 years wishing I could go back. I know you'll never take me back. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking if you'll come see my mom. She wants to apologize to you before it's too late. The room became completely silent. I wasn't expecting this. I thought he had come asking for money or another chance. Instead, he came carrying someone else's final wish. I looked out the window. The rain had finally stopped. Then I quietly asked, "Does she know you're here?" He nodded. I told her. I didn't think you'd even open the door. A long silence followed. Finally, I picked up my car keys. Let's go. Daniel looked at me, completely stunned. You'll come? I took a deep breath. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the woman who treated me like family when I needed one the most. As we walked toward the front door, neither of us knew that the biggest twist of all was still waiting for us. The drive to the hospital felt longer than I remembered. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, filled with years of regret, heartbreak, and questions that no one could answer anymore. When we arrived, Daniel stopped walking. I don't know if I deserve to go in. I looked at him. Maybe you don't. But she's waiting. We stepped into the hospital room together. Linda was sitting near the window. She looked much smaller than I remembered, the cheerful, energetic woman who used to bake apple pies every Thanksgiving, now looked fragile. When she saw me, her eyes immediately filled with tears. Emma? She reached for my hand. I knew you'd come. I smiled softly. I couldn't say no to you. She squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry. I shook my head. You have nothing to apologize for. She looked toward Daniel. No, I do. I saw my son changing. I saw the lies. I saw the distance. And I kept hoping he'd fix everything before it was too late. She began crying. I should have told you. I should have warned you. I'm sorry. I hugged her tightly. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Sometimes, silence says more than words ever can. A few days later, Linda asked if she could have lunch with both of us. It felt strange. The three of us sitting at the same table again. Just like old times. Halfway through lunch, she placed a small envelope in front of me. I've been keeping this for years. I looked confused. What is it? She smiled. Open it later. That evening, after I returned home, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was dated 3 years earlier, the day after Daniel left me. My hands trembled as I began reading. Dear Emma, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I tried to stop Daniel. I begged him not to throw away the best thing that ever happened to him. He wouldn't listen. One day he'll realize what he's lost. But by then, it may be too late. Please don't let his mistakes convince you that you're unworthy of love. You were the daughter I always wished I'd had. No matter what happens, never stop believing in yourself. Love, Linda. I couldn't hold back my tears. For the first time in years, I cried because someone had truly seen me, not as a wife, not as someone's ex, but simply as Emma. 2 weeks later, Linda passed away peacefully at her funeral. Daniel stood beside me. He looked completely broken. After the service ended, he quietly asked, "Can I tell you something?" I nodded. I've spent 3 years wishing I could undo one decision. I thought leaving you would make me happier. Instead, I lost my marriage, my best friend, my home, and now, my mom. He looked at me. I don't expect forgiveness anymore. I just wanted you to know, you were never the problem. I was. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I smiled, not because the pain had disappeared, but because I no longer carried it. Daniel, I forgave you a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't always mean going back. He slowly nodded. I know. I just needed to hear that. Then, for the first time since our divorce, we hugged, not as husband and wife, not as people trying to rebuild a relationship, but as two people, finally letting go of the past. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference. Someone in the audience asked, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned from losing the person you loved most?" I smiled, then answered, "Sometimes the worst heartbreak becomes the beginning of the best chapter of your life. Never beg someone to stay. The people who truly love you will never make you compete for their love." As the audience applauded, I looked toward the back of the room. Daniel was standing there. He smiled, not because he wanted me back, but because he finally understood that love isn't about possession. It's about respect, and once respect is gone, love cannot survive. I'm Emma. Thank you for listening to my story. This is Emma Tells All. Sometimes the person who walks away isn't your greatest loss. They're the reason you finally discover your own worth. A year passed. Life had finally become peaceful. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. My photography, which had once been just a hobby, had turned into a successful business. Companies were hiring me for major campaigns. Magazines began publishing my work. One afternoon, I received an email that made me read it 3 times before I believed it. I had been selected as one of America's top emerging women entrepreneurs. I covered my mouth with my hands and cried. Not because of the award, but because I remembered the girl who had once sat alone on the kitchen floor, wondering if she was enough. That girl had no idea she would one day build the life she had always dreamed of. A few weeks later, the award ceremony was held in Chicago. Hundreds of people filled the ballroom, business owners, journalists, families. As my name was announced, I walked onto the stage. The applause echoed through the room. I accepted the award, then stepped up to the microphone. I looked around the audience and smiled. I used to believe that losing someone meant losing myself. But I learned something. Sometimes, the people who walk away make room for the life you were always meant to have. The audience became silent. Then, they stood. A standing ovation. As I stepped off the stage, a young woman stopped me. She couldn't have been older than 25. She was crying. "You don't know me, but your story saved my life. I was going to go back to someone who kept hurting me, but after hearing you, I realized I deserve better." I hugged her. At that moment, I understood something. Pain doesn't always destroy us. Sometimes, it prepares us to help someone else survive theirs. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I visited Linda's grave. I placed fresh white lilies beside her headstone. She had once told me they were her favorite flowers. I sat there for a while, smiling, talking to her as if she were still listening. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." As I stood to leave, I noticed someone walking toward me. It was Daniel. He stopped several feet away. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I come every month," I answered. He nodded. "So do I." There was no awkwardness anymore, no anger, just two people who had finally accepted the past. He smiled gently. "I heard about your award. You deserve every bit of it." "Thank you." He looked down at the flowers. "My mom would have been so proud of you." I smiled. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, because we finally learned the lessons she tried to teach us." He laughed quietly. "I still have a long way to go." "So do we all." He extended his hand. Instead, I gave him a warm hug, not because I wanted yesterday back, but because I had completely let it go. As we walked away from the cemetery, we chose different paths. He walked toward the parking lot. I walked toward my future. And somehow, that felt exactly the way it was supposed to be. If you're listening to this story today and someone has walked away from you, please remember this. Never measure your worth by someone else's inability to see it. The people who leave teach you strength. The people who stay teach you love. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making someone regret losing you. It's building a life so full of peace that you no longer need their apology. I'm Emma. Thank you for spending your time with me. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. This is Emma Tells All. Until next time, take care of yourself and never stop believing that your best chapter may still be ahead.